Welcome to Farm to Stable, a science-based equine nutrition podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Nettie Liebert. I'm a lifelong horse person and professional equine nutritionist with the goal of helping horses and their humans create balanced diets to set them up for success, no matter what age, discipline, or circumstance. Disclaimer, the information discussed here is based on current scientific research and is for educational purposes only. Every horse's individual needs vary. This is not a substitute for veterinary medicine or nutrition consultation. Hello and welcome to another episode of Farm to Stable, an equine nutrition podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Nettie Liebert, and thank you so much for joining me. This episode, we're going to talk a little bit about the forage alternative topic of hay cubes versus hay pellets. So what about beet pulp? Of course, you know I had to sneak that one in there. So this came about, I was taking a riding lesson last week, and someone comes up to me and says, "You're a nutritionist, right?" Which always leads to a fun conversation. And I said, yes. And the person asked me, really, what is the difference between feeding hay cubes or hay pellets? And there could be reasons why you feed one or the other, but I wanted to dive into that a little bit on this episode. And then, of course, I also wanted to talk about beet pulp because it does come in a pellet form. So we're going to touch on that at the end. But first, let's talk about why you would even consider either a hay cube or a hay pellet for your horse's diet. There are some really good advantages to these. Now, again, they are considered forage alternatives and generally can potentially serve as a pound-for-pound replacement for hay or even pasture. They come with a guaranteed protein, crude protein usually, fat, which is going to be pretty low, and fiber on the label. And sometimes you can get a carbohydrate or extended analysis available from the manufacturer. This depends on the manufacturer, and you have to call them and ask for it. They're not going to be defensive about it, or they shouldn't be. It is something that any feed manufacturer should freely give to you. So it's a pretty common question. But if you are buying one of these forage alternative products and you call them up the manufacturer and you say, "Hey, can you tell me how much calcium is in this or what the non-structural carbohydrate or starch and sugar content is?" they should be able to tell you that. One of the other advantages of hay cubes or hay pellets is that they're consistent. It's a consistent forage source, and we'll get into why this can be important. For example, travel. It's relatively easy to store, and horses like it. Right? So it's not going to do you any good if your horse won't eat it. But horses do tend to like them. Now, what about some disadvantages? Well, when it comes to hay pellets, there's no real fiber length in a pellet, right? The hay is ground down, and it can lead to some fast consumption. It must be soaked for horses with poor dentition. But there are reasons to still feed a pellet, which we're going to talk about, especially if you have a horse that can't chew hay properly. So generally, forage alternatives can be easily worked into a horse's diet if it's necessary, and I've done this a lot of times. There are a lot of potential uses. So I mentioned travel. So if a horse travels a lot, sometimes if you're bringing along bales of hay, you may run out of room in the bed of your truck or your trailer. They take up a lot of space. But if your horse regularly has, say, some soaked hay cubes as part of their diet, it could take place of a portion of that hay and make it easier to transport while the horse is maintaining consistency as much as possible in the diet while on the road. Hay pellets can also make great treats, or a small addition to a horse, maybe, to appease the horse that absolutely insists that he needs more grain concentration, but you know he doesn't. And we all know and love one of these horses. So it's kind of, here, yeah, you're getting a little something, or maybe they're getting a handful of hay pellets or something, but not something like a grain concentrate, which would probably be a little more calorie dense. But I digress. Let's start with hay pellets specifically. What are they? They're just what they sound. They're ground up hay made into a pellet form. And hay pellets typically come in two sizes. You can get larger hay pellets or smaller ones. That might be what you're a little more familiar with, or the picture that comes to your mind when you think of a pellet. They can be soaked. They are a good option for horses that cannot chew hay. Now, the con is that if you are soaking, it can take a while, upwards of an hour, depending on the pellet, the hardness, and hay pellets are typically consumed much faster than an equivalent amount or by weight of hay. A horse needs to chew hay a lot more than they need to chew a pellet. But again, pellets do have their place. Hay cubes are chopped hay fibers that are compressed into a cube form. And you've probably seen them in your own feed room or perhaps at another's barn. And a lot of times you can even break them apart with your hands. They do offer some length to the fiber, which is good. We need some length, about 2 inches or so, to our fiber to keep the horse's digestive tract moving. So for a horse that can't chew hay, very often they can handle a soaked hay cube because the fiber length is much shorter. And of course, with all of the water that helps to soak it, it makes it much softer and easier to get down. They hold a lot of water. So this is my go-to for horses that can't have hay anymore. Now, it does take some time to soak a hay cube. It's not something that's going to soak in 5 minutes. It needs a lot more water than you think it does. And that can be a challenge in the cold weather if you live someplace where you experience a cold climate. So it doesn't mean it can't be done. It just means that you need to plan ahead a little bit, and it can be done. You don't have to soak it for 12 hours, but usually at least 30 to 60 minutes in plenty of water. And I always tell people, when you think you've added enough water, add some more because those cubes will soak it up. So again, why feed one versus the other? In either case, if your horse can't chew hay, and if your forage quality is inconsistent, right? And by forage quality, that could be hay or pasture. If you're experiencing perhaps drought and all of your pastures have dried up, or you just are having a hard time getting good quality hay, adding in some of these forage alternatives can be really useful. Now, when it comes to pellets, as I mentioned earlier, if you need to feed a horse that does not need or get a grain concentrate, but you want him to think he does, you can very often give him a portion or her a portion of hay pellets. And again, think of 1 pound of grass hay pellets, such as Timothy, as about 1 pound of grass hay. It's a ballpark estimate if you're not doing all the calculations at home by yourself. When it comes to training and you're watching your horse's intake, even hay pellets can serve as an easy, economical treat, especially the larger ones. Now, again, assuming your horse has good teeth and can chew them properly. So many people like to use training treats, whether it's for groundwork or, learning to stand at the mounting block or whatever the case may be. And they're palatable. Horses like them. You can also get hay pellets in a couple of different varieties. I've seen them come in alfalfa, in Timothy, in teff, a couple of mixtures out there. So you do have some options. When it comes to the cubes, as a hay replacement, I do prefer cubes as opposed to pellets because of that fiber length that I talked about earlier. But again, you've got to soak these things for the horses that can't chew. You can feed cubes dry if your horse has healthy teeth and can chew with no problem, but I do tend to recommend that you soak them at least a little bit, even for the guys that have good teeth, just because the cubes can be pretty dry, and anything to increase water intake is good, and reduce the risk of choke is also very good. With soaked cubes, if you have a horse that needs to have a powdered medication, or you're trying to mix in or hide a supplement, or even feed electrolytes, really easy to mix in with soaked cubes because you're generally feeding a certain volume. And mixing in the other stuff you're trying to hide can get, or the taste of it or the presence of it can get diluted out pretty well. So it often boils down to how are the horse's teeth when I make a recommendation for someone who says, should I feed hay pellets or cubes? Beyond that, of course, the horse's lifestyle, what they do for a living, why do they need this, what is their feed situation, and all of those other questions that we think about. But again, they are both potential options. Now, I promised, I know you're on the edge of your seat, that I would talk about beet pulp and why. So beet pulp is another form of forage alternative, and it often comes in either shreds, like literally just shredded up pieces of beet pulp, or in compressed pellets. when it comes to beet pulp pellets, they must be soaked prior to feeding. I'll say that again. Beet pulp pellets must be soaked before you feed them. They soak up a lot of water, and it does take them some time to do so. At least an hour or so is what I would allow. And again, adding plenty of water. Even if you weigh out 1/4 pound of pellets, put it in a bucket, add some water, add a lot of water. It's going to soak it up. And that soaking time will vary, again, depending on how much or what the weight of the pellets is that you're soaking, the water temperature, and the environment that you're in. But they offer all the good benefits once they're soaked up of that digestible fiber, that prebiotic hindgut support, helps the good microbes grow. And when it comes to the beet pulp shreds, they soak much more quickly. About 15 minutes if you want to soak it. I mean, you can just add water to beet pulp shreds and feed it. You don't have to let it soak. I usually recommend that you do, but you don't have to. And I'm going to say this, and you're not going to believe me, but it's true. Beet pulp shreds can be fed dry, but I do not recommend it. I always recommend that you soak beet pulp shreds. You can go back to some of the myth podcasts. Dry beet pulp will not expand in your horse's stomach and cause it to explode. It's not going to swell up in their esophagus unless you're feeding massive amounts of beet pulp. And if that's the case, your horse's diet is probably in need of attention anyway. But beet pulp shreds, you can weigh them out, add some water, about 2 parts water to 1 part shreds at least, and give it 15 minutes or so in tepid water, and you're good to go. Now, remember that you must weigh these things. 1 quart of beet pulp shreds does not weigh the same as 1 quart of pellets. The pellets are going to be much heavier. They're denser. So you do have to weigh them. Same when it comes to the hay cubes or the hay pellets. It's really important to weigh them out. And if you weigh out, say, 1 pound or 2 of the cubes and you think, well, that doesn't look like very much, when you add the water and expands and it fluffs up a little bit, it's going to give you a little more volume and help your horse have some productive chew time, we'll say. We'll put it that way. So at the end of the day, whether or not one of these forage alternatives is appropriate for your horse depends on a lot of things. Their current diet, their forage source. Is their diet otherwise balanced? Do you need to replace your horse's hay? Are their teeth in good condition? And it can be done. As I've probably mentioned the story on this podcast before, I've had many clients say to me that their horses cannot eat hay anymore, and what do? And when you create a balanced diet mixed with soaked hay cubes or whatever else they may need, they can do really very well on that type of diet. And if you're thinking, well, my horse's teeth are fine. He just had a dental and everything's good, but my hay quality isn't that great and I would like to improve that. Yeah, then sometimes you could even mix in some hay cubes or pellets as a replacement for some of that hay. It's also a good way to stretch your hay budget if you're trying to, again, extend the time that it takes you to go through a ton or several tons of hay and you want to mix it in with some cubes. Sometimes economically that works. Sometimes it doesn't. It just depends. But again, that is something that a qualified nutritionist can help you determine and if it's appropriate for your horse and your feeding program. So I hope you gained a few insights from our discussion about hay cubes and hay pellets and, of course, a little bit of beet pulp tossed in there. If you have topics you would like to hear, please reach out to Equine Nutrition PhD at yahoo.com. You can also reach out on Facebook at Liebert Equine Nutritional Consulting. But if you're trying to send me a message, use email because Messenger doesn't always cooperate, but I'm not going to get into that today. In the meantime, I hope you are able to enjoy plenty of quality time with your horses, and I thank you so much for listening. Please like and share and tell a friend. Thanks again for listening. We'll see you next time. Thank you for listening to the latest episode of Farm to Stable, a science-based equine nutrition podcast. Please share and subscribe if you found the content interesting. And if you have a topic you'd like to hear about, send it to equinenutritionphd at yahoo.com.